Welcome to the Knightline Podcast, your source for UCF football and former UCF player information. All right, Night Nation, this is Andrew Phegley, and to my left over here we have...
In the handsome zone, Troy Ondrizek.
All right. Also, we have by phone this time, we have Brandon Helwig, editor and publisher of the UCFsports.com. So, hello, Brandon.
Hello, guys. How are you all doing tonight?
We're good.
It was a good weekend. Good weekend of football. And a good Thursday night of football. Actually, that's a lie. It wasn't a good Thursday night of football, but a good result.
Yeah, we won the game. That's definitely a positive. Brandon, you were there. What's your take on what happened on Thursday night with the Knights?
It was really crazy. It's like everything that had happened prior to that pretty much was in the game. The next to last final play of the game really didn't matter. After all, everything was fixated on that one play, which obviously was Brandon Alexander diving for, what everyone assumed watching it on TV or in the stadium. You assumed that Houston quarterback Greg Ward was diving in for what would have been the game-winning touchdown. Brandon Alexander dove for him. The ball flew out of his hand. It was such a bang-bang play. When you were there, you didn't quite understand. I was waiting for the signal that it was a touchdown. And, all the fans were cheering like they had won the game. All the Houston players and the quarterback, Greg Ward, got up and started celebrating like they had won the game. And so it took a few seconds to kind of register, what happened. You knew the ball came out, from the vantage point it happened so quickly. You just didn't know if he broke the plane first and then fumbled, which if he broke the plane first is a touchdown, or really what had happened. And the first thing I think I saw was Clayton Geathers, cheering, celebrating, jumping up and down. I didn't really notice the referee making the touchback signal. He might have been blocked, or I just was looking somewhere else. And I was on the UCF side, and I think I heard, some people just sort of saying, it's a touchback. And I'm like, he did, I guess he did fumble before he went over the goal. No one was really sure at that time what had happened. So then they played the replay on the video board, and when that was replayed and proved that was the correct call, obviously it's going to the replay booth. And when they showed the replay a couple of times, you knew it wasn't going to be overturned. You knew that was the correct call. And the UCF sideline, at least where I was standing, everyone was celebrating. It just, the emotions were just unreal. You go from losing the game, which is what you thought was going to happen on that play, when you saw, pretty much that whole left side open up and he was running for the end zone, all the way to knowing that you are winning the game. That was a game-saving play. It was just weird. It was just, I don't know that there's ever been an ending. I know you used to have a lot of those last year, spectacular, comebacks that meant this game might be comparable a little bit. It looked like you were losing that, had some big plays to hold on to win, but it was amazing just the reaction. You saw a lot of celebrating from players, and a lot of players just kind of stood there stunned. I mean, they didn't celebrate. You look at some, especially, I think you saw the players that were on the field. Again, Brandon Alexander, Clayton Geathers, those guys were jumping up and down celebrating. You see Jordan Ozeright, Shaquille Griffin, Terrence Plummer, Troy Gray, those guys walk off the field just like they lost. They just had a look on their face like, man, we really got away with one here. So, yeah, it was just a really odd way to end that game.
It was. I think that to me that was one of the most odd endings ever in a college football game, or any football game, to be honest with you, that I've ever watched. And my phone was going off, and people were, texting, oh, we lost it. I was like, hold on, just wait a minute. But, so the score wound up being 17-12 UCF over Houston. They had an announced attendance there of 26,685. Did it seem like there were that many people there? Because it did not look like there were that many people there on TV.
Yeah, did they put
it's kind of interesting. Of course, they have a brand new stadium. It's called TDECU Stadium, which I guess is apparently a credit union around those parts. When East Carolina plays there, they'll fall right at home with that name.
Yeah, they'll love that.
But yeah, I liked the stadium. I was just reading some things about it right now. It seats 40,000. It looks a lot bigger than 40,000, just with the way it's structured. There's 3 decks, even though each deck isn't huge, but there's 3 decks, and they're you feel like the fans are right on top of you. The only attendance as far as the stadium that was strong was the student attendance. They packed their entire section. They had that one end zone, pretty much the lower end zone that wrapped, I think, kind of maybe from the 10 or 15 yard line on the sideline. They had that section completely filled. Everything else was kind of spotty, hit or miss. Without really going to games or having been there before, I didn't know, really what the attendance was going to be. I have some pictures and some kind of video of the crowd that I'll be posting later on my site to kind of give fans an idea of what it actually looked like during the game on all sides. It wasn't great. I don't think their fan base has really grown much. That was kind of where their fan base always was, even with their older stadium that they played at. And the only other time I went there was 2010 when UCF played there on a Friday night. Is that they get very, very good, very strong student support, maybe around 10 or 12,000. I'm not sure if that's what it was, but it seemed like that. And then the rest is just there's not a whole lot of other fans besides students there. I mean, most sections had a lot of empty seats. It wasn't that impressive, but I mean, in their defense, Houston is a very large city. A lot of the suburban areas spread out. It was a Thursday. There's terrible traffic. If you don't happen to live in that surrounding area, if you live in one of those outlying suburbs, there's a lot of traffic to deal with. So, I don't really know. Obviously, it didn't look great on television from what I hear, but that's just, I guess, the state of their fan base anyway.
Yeah, well, there were good things and bad things both that came from this game, obviously. Everybody on both sides of the ball, there were some issues. From what I saw, there was not a lot of run defense. The pass defense and the secondary looked a lot better to me. But what's your take on the defense and the offense in general and how they played the game?
Well, I mean, if you look at that UCF defense, they came up with a lot of big individual plays, particularly in that first half, just limiting Houston to field goals. There was that goal line stand they had there. I think it was late in the first quarter. That I think Houston's leading 3-0 at that point. They score there. It's a 10-0 game, and obviously they held them to no points, and that was a huge play. You got turnovers. I believe what Alexander and Gebbers both had picks in that game. I'm not sure if the Houston offense. I know it was. I'm going to say it's a good game for the UCF defense, but I really wasn't that impressed with the Houston offense. At least the one that was on the field when John O'Corn was playing quarterback. I know O'Corn's been described as a streaky quarterback, and he was streaky in terms of basketball. He didn't get any help. He didn't. He was throwing when he did throw it to the right place. I haven't really watched the game back, but there was countless drops by their wide receivers. I know Deontay Greenberry, who arguably their top receiver. I think any UCF fans that paid attention to the game week know that he was talking a lot of trash about UCF.
I thought that it was great that since he talked so much trash and, UCF's not any good, blah, 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 they weren't any good last year, and then all of a sudden, who's not any good? He's the one that's not catching anything. Everything's getting intercepted.
Well, he was my defensive MVP for UCF. For the first thing, he had 3 catches on 12 targets, 2 interceptions going to him, only had 1 play over 10 yards, had 3 drops, and fired up that UCF defense. Thank you very much, Greenberry. You screwed your team over with your mouth and your play.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and it was a pretty emotional game. I mean, there was a little bit of pushing and shoving at times. You knew the guys were going to be fired up. I mean, when they were told about that quote in the days before the game, they kind of know. They get told and they get coached on what you say in interviews, what you don't say. You never do anything to incite the opposing team. You only say good things. You only compliment the team. So what that Deontay Greenberry did, you'll never hear, at least the Georgia O'Leary coach UCF player will ever say anything remotely like that. But they were, as far as off the record goes, when they were down there, like, you really said that? They were fired up, that they were really anxious on that matchup and everything.
I'm sure his coach was not happy about that.
I'm not really sure. I was kind of reading some of the feedback on some of their message boards and everything, and apparently that's not the first time that some of their players have said stuff like that, and I think some people are using that to criticize the head coach, which you know how it is. If you start losing some games, the fan base wants the coach fired. I mean, that's pretty much commonplace at every school, and it's kind of like that at Houston right now. They were, you know, kind of thought they were riding high with those Kevin Sumlin years, you know, with Case Keenum, and there was that one year they were undefeated going into the Conference USA Championship game. They pretty much had their ticket punched to a BCS Bowl, but they lost the championship game that year, and so obviously they lost to the Southern Miss. Of course, Southern Miss tanked right after that season. But ever since then, they've kind of been, you know, good, maybe mediocre. They haven't been at that level, so I know he's kind of on the hot seat, at least in terms of their fans are. But you know, yeah, it was just really strange for the guy to say that. But as far as the game itself, as far as the offense, that was not a good game for the UCF offense. I mean, thank goodness, you know, Holman early in the second half did find Rashad Perryman, who, you know, kind of broke a tackle on that catch and ran in for the 52-yarder.
Yeah, that was really more Perryman than it was than Holman. Yeah, and he missed, and like I said, I haven't really watched the tape back from, you know, but what it appeared on the field and the feedback is that Holman missed a lot of plays that he should have hit. Either didn't throw it right, threw it to the wrong person, was locking in on receivers. No progression check down from Holman at all.
Yeah. That's the Holman that we saw during August. That was the Holman in preseason camp. That was the reason. That was why Holman did not win the starting quarterback job coming out of camp. That's the reason DeNovo was named the starter for Penn State. That was some of the things I think were creeping back in that game that, you know, we really hadn't seen. He kind of regressed a little bit. And I was watching the O'Leary television show this morning, and, you know, he just kind of says if Houston wants to win games, they need to get better offensively, more consistent, especially in the passing game. So I'm kind of wondering, you know, this week against BYU, and we'll talk about that in a little while, that, you know, if Holman, you know, comes out and maybe has a couple series like he was having against Houston, you know, maybe do you slide out Nick Patty for a series to see what he can do? I know you don't want to have that whole quarterback controversy thing going on.
No, but I know that George has done that before. He says that sometimes it's good for the starting quarterback to see the game from the sideline a little bit. He did that with Blake, and he would throw Godfrey in there, and you know, and I think last year he threw Holman in there a couple times for that exact reason. So maybe that wouldn't be a bad thing to happen.
And maybe that was what helped Holman in that opener against Penn State over in Ireland. He watched the game from the sidelines, the first half of it anyway. So yeah, I don't know. I'm kind of curious if that happens. I wouldn't be shocked if that does happen coming this Thursday against BYU.
I don't think Holman's regression in play was the entirety of the fault of the offense, or it was the reason why the offense sputtered as much. Definitely hindered it, but I thought our play calling was absolutely wretched. You know, especially in that fourth quarter, we had 19 yards of total offense. It was 1st and 10, let's do a draw play. 2nd and 9, let's do a draw play. 3rd and 11, let's throw it deep, and then punt. You can't tell me we didn't play prevent offense and literally, you know, was willing to walk out of there 1 and 3.
I think sometimes that they're calling plays thinking that they still have that 2013 team out there with a good offensive line that can move the line of scrimmage. You can get 4 or 5 yards per run. You know, you can chew up the clock that way because the offensive line performance, as anyone can see, in that whole Bethune-Cookman game, you know, you can't really read into that. I mean, maybe they have some good individual players here and there, but that's not an FBS level football team. So maybe it felt good about protection and everything else in that game. But you know, this was a pretty decent, as what you would hope to be, a pretty decent conference team that, you know, the run game just wasn't there. And, you know, Will Stanback, we're not entirely sure why he didn't play the first quarter.
I was going to ask you about that. I texted you actually during the game. I'm like, where is he? I thought maybe you would know something.
He was anxious. Yeah, you could kind of see where he was, and I'm like, okay, where is he? Why is he not out there? Of course, nothing really surprises me with O'Leary and starting players, and he's always kind of, you know, been high on
Do you think that Stanback is in some kind of trouble with O'Leary? There's been rumors. I mean, but is there anything that has been said?
I don't know if it's trouble. He does have turf toe, which is the reason that he did not play against Penn State. And I think even though they would never admit it publicly, it would. Now I don't know this for a fact, but it wouldn't surprise me if he's not 100%. And so knowing that, they want to go easy on him, maybe, sit him for a quarter and then just kind of use him for the last three. That could have something to do with it. I think I would buy that more than those other rooms.
It makes no sense to sit your best back at the beginning of the game as opposed to the second quarter or third quarter and then get him in there. You want your offense in a rhythm, and this, to me, once again, goes towards our offensive game plan.
It's not the first time. I mean, it's not the first time stuff like this has happened with the UCF. For years and years, it was, let's start Ronnie Weaver, and you have Latavius Murray wasn't getting action in games, and then when he finally did, was that 2011 season maybe, and then when Latavius Murray finally got in there, he ended up having a great year, but he pretty much set off the whole first half of the year because he was trying to play Ronnie Weaver the whole time. So, I don't know. As far as running back controversy, playing certain guys and whatnot, that's kind of been a recurring theme the past few years with O'Leary.
It is, and I don't, I don't necessarily believe that that's a good game to play with your players as far as their confidence level and everything else, personally.
And rhythm. Our offense has completely lacked the rhythm so far this season, except for the second half of the Penn State game, and therefore we've completely, stripped them from that ability to be able to develop such.
Yeah, hopefully we won't see those games like that again next week.
You never know.
I wouldn't doubt it. But anyway, so UCF improves to 2-2 on the year, 1-0 in the American League or the American Athletic Conference. Tuesday marked UCF's fifth straight win on a conference opener, and the Knights are 10-0 in their last 10 regular season conference games. And we moved to 5-1 all-time against the Cougars. That's a good
Bill Simmons says there. Orlando is full of Cougars and is dominated by them. So it's kind of apropos that we dominate the Cougars in football.
That's a different kind of Cougar.
That's it for tat.
What I like the comment someone made after the game that Houston is the new Marshall. It doesn't matter what happens in the game. UCF can kind of look like they're on the brink of a loss, but whatever happens, they always win that game. And it's kind of been like that in those games that UCF has played against Houston.
It's a true story. A lot of close games, but a lot of victories for UCF. I have no problem having their number. All right, you did a breakdown of the American. You seem about the only other person I know who's as committed to the rest of our conference as I am, or is as interested.
As we are.
Oh. I like to say me. Anyways, big upset per se, but it did not shock me at all. Memphis taking down Cincinnati. Did you see that game, Brandon?
Yeah, I watched at least the first half, and kind of once you got to the second half and you kind of knew what the result would be, I was kind of going back and forth and watching a bunch of different games, but that didn't surprise me. I did my picks last week, and I picked Memphis to upset Cincinnati. I was not impressed with Cincinnati's defense. Prior to that game, they were giving up just ungodly amounts of yards, and I thought Memphis, then when you're going to see, what they did, it was a 7-3 game with Ole Miss. They had played the week before, 7-3 going into the fourth quarter. Things got a little bit out of hand with some scores late to make the score look a little bit more lopsided in favor of Ole Miss. And, see Ole Miss, what they did beating Alabama yesterday. Of course, the other quality loss that Memphis has is, they were toe-to-toe with on the road at UCLA, only losing by 7 points. But, they have a pretty good defense. They've got a pretty good offense, and, seeing how Cincinnati had fared early on, I thought that was a game that Memphis had a great chance to win. I don't know if I expected 41-14, but when you look at it, you look at the Cincinnati defensive stats game by game, they allowed 710 yards to Ohio State, which, Ohio State, even a Braxton Miller-less, Ohio State's still a pretty good team, and then they go and allow 610 yards to Memphis last night. So, the interesting thing about Memphis is, it's still early. I mean, most conference teams have only played one game within the conference. But if you look at, of course, you got East Carolina. I think it has to be considered kind of the top dog right now as the favorite, just based on what they've been doing offensively and some of their non-conference wins, obviously beating North Carolina and Virginia Tech. You're still going to have UCF in there. 1-0, obviously, as UCF people, we know full well that things need to improve offensively and everything else. But the good thing for UCF is there's a very winnable stretch of games coming up. Barring anything unforeseen happening, I think UCF is favored in their last non-conference game this week against BYU. UCF should be favored in every game, at least until that USF game. They probably should be favored against USF. and obviously all with it to the season-ending game at East Carolina on December 4th. So there's a very good opportunity for UCF to run the table, at least going into that final game against East Carolina. Then you look at Memphis. I think you got to put them in that contender category all of a sudden. The interesting thing about Memphis with the way the conference schedule played out, you have 11 conference teams this year and 8 conference games. So that means there are 2 teams in the conference that you do not play. For UCF, they do not play Cincinnati, do not play Memphis. So, but Memphis, on the other hand, of course, they don't play UCF, as I said, but they also do not play East Carolina. So those could be the 2 best teams or 2 of the top 3 teams. They're not playing within the conference. They got a great chance to rack up a lot of wins. It would be interesting if Memphis goes 8-0 in the conference, and obviously East Carolina and UCF, one of them is going to knock each other off. You could have 2 8-0 conference co-champions with the ECU/UCF and a Memphis. It'll be kind of interesting to see how this all plays out.
To touch on Memphis real quick a little bit, Memphis, I thought they lost that game to Ole Miss because they took the ball out of their talented quarterback's hands, Paxton Lynch, and tried to run the ball a lot. Now, Lynch had 2 passing touchdowns, 2 rushing touchdowns, and he's a Central Florida guy. How did we miss him coming out of Deltona?
Well, I don't know if UCF missed him so much as not making him a priority, and no one made him a priority. He went to, what was the name of the school? Deltona Christian Academy. There was some school that no one's ever heard of. I don't think you've ever had a signee before. And
at least 40 people have heard of that school. Some people have had to graduate from there. They've had. they're able to field a football team.
I had never heard of it. I never heard of the school. I never heard of Paxton Lynch. And then it's been an annual thing. Is the Central Florida High School All-Star Game, which is played in mid-December every year, I guess, amongst the teams that at least at that point aren't in the high school championships. And it was at Lake Brantley High School that year, and I believe it was being televised by Bright House Sports Network. And he was starting quarterback on one of those teams, and he looked good. He looked like a quarterback, how tall he is, about 6'5", whatever he is. He looked the part. He looked like a pretty good quarterback, and that's kind of how he got noticed. Who is this guy? Is he being recruited by anyone? I think he was getting mostly lower level looks. And Memphis, they needed a quarterback. They found out about him. They gave him an offer. That was his first offer, his only visit. And he committed to Memphis. What happened with UCF that year is they had a quarterback that was committed. Jonathan Wallace, I believe was his name, from the Mobile, Alabama area. He had been committed the entire month of January, and then. Right on signing day morning, as happened, which happens quite a bit, is I guess Auburn, either they had a spot open, they had a guy decommit. I don't know what happened with Auburn, but all of a sudden they had an open spot or 2 in their class, so they go and say, hey, we know you didn't have an offer before. We know you didn't take an official visit, but do you want a spot in our class? Here's a scholarship to get Auburn. So you got a guy. Actually, no, John, he wasn't from Mobile. He was from Columbus, Georgia area. And so, Columbus, Georgia is basically the Auburn metro area, only 30 minutes away from Auburn. So, of course, he's going to go to Auburn. That wasn't a shock. So when that happened, UCF tried to do the same thing. They tried to do, what's a guy that we think maybe we can get to switch late, a guy that, was on our board but wasn't one of our A-list guys. So they did the same thing with Paxton Lynch on signing day, contacted his coach or whatever, said, hey, before you sign with Memphis, we got a spot. You want to come to UCF? Here's a scholarship. But he was solid with his commitment. He said thanks, but no thanks. He had been committed to Memphis, and then they had, believed him from the start. So that's kind of how that happened. So he did kind of miss on him, but then they kind of didn't because they didn't want him. Of course, you never know what could happen when he had been the starting quarterback at UCF, how he had originally signed. I don't really know what would have happened, but it looks like he made a pretty good decision going to Memphis.
Absolutely. It's good to see a local kid doing well, too.
It is. I think we're going to get ready to move on to what's going to happen next week or this coming week on Thursday. We have the BYU, what are they, the Cougars again?
You know what? Bring on the Cougars. Orlando loves Cougars.
Yeah, bring on the Cougars, I guess. So we're going to start this off with Kurt's question. It's a little thing that we do, Brandon. I don't know if you're familiar with this.
You're going to love this music. It's, circa 1908.
Going to play some music here, and then we're going to do Kurt's question. All right, Knight fans, welcome to this episode of Kurt's Questions, featuring Kurt Searcy. All right, this week's question from Kurt is, what does the UCF defense do differently versus a BYU team without its best running threat. Quarterback Taysom Hill, who suffered a broken leg in the Utah State game last week, a game that BYU lost. And I was just looking at the polls here, the ESPN or AP poll actually, and BYU has completely fallen out of that poll, which is I find kind of interesting.
Well, Utah State wasn't really a highly regarded team, and to answer Kurt's question, Taysom Hill was, because now he's out for the season, the entirety of their offense per se, a dual threat quarterback who can run and throw, and couldn't really throw that efficiently. Therefore, even with or without Hill, I would have stacked the box regardless. Our secondary, stepped up last week as they should. They didn't give them much of a cushion. They were jumping a couple routes. Man, they stuck it to those Houston boys, and those wide receivers didn't like getting hit. And they started making some drops because they heard some footsteps. And this is the same thing that UCF needs to do this week. Lay the wood early, just like Gethers did on John O'Corn on the first drive to get him that taunting penalty. And then just stack the box. Don't let him run. Force him to throw, especially with a quarterback that doesn't have a ton of experience. He'll often, regrettably for the young man, does get injured, so his backups get a fair amount of reps. But they don't have rhythm yet. They haven't got game speed especially against a team as fast as an experience as UCF. Therefore, stack the box and make them throw the ball over the top. Make this a shootout per se, because they could not defend the long ball against Utah State, and that's how we need to beat them.
I think that we have a much better chance. Brandon, what's your take on this question?
Well, you kind of look at BYU. It's not just they're losing their starting quarterback superstar. It's like you're losing your star quarterback and your star running back with pretty much what Taysom Hill meant to that offense. And, I did watch that game the other night. It was a terrible injury. You kind of knew when it happened that it was serious, that he wasn't going to be playing anytime soon. I guess word came in later in the game that he did fracture his leg.
Was it like a Theismann thing or what? I didn't see it.
No. You tackled him from behind. He rolled
it was
over.
I don't know if people saw the Ole Miss Alabama game. One of the Alabama players, I guess he broke his leg. His foot was pointing in the wrong direction. It wasn't quite that graphic, but you can tell that it got rolled up on there pretty good. You can obviously tell that he was in a lot of pain. It was visibly in his face. So you knew it was a little bit more serious than a sprained ankle, but you knew it wasn't going to be good. But he was BYU, and that's another reason why they fell out of the polls. I mean, I'm not surprised, even if Taysom Hill hadn't gotten hurt and they would have lost to Utah State. I just feel that they probably would have fallen out anyway. But it just kind of shows what people think about BYU. And then when the betting lines came out later Sunday afternoon, UCF is a 3-point favorite. So I don't think that would have been the case at all had Taysom Hill not been injured. I think BYU would have been favored. So I think people are pretty much, I don't know if you can write off BYU. They'll be a pretty good team, obviously, coming into it, but their backup quarterback is nothing like the dynamic athlete that Taysom Hill was. And they've got other injuries. I really haven't had time to really check to see what the post-game report was, but he wasn't the only player to leave that game. I think their starting safety got hurt when they're starting offensive linemen, so they're really banged up. And it's also the short week. They played late Friday night. This is a Thursday game, so it's one less day than UCF. Plus, they got to have that cross-country travel, which is never an easy trip.
Yeah, it's unfortunate for Taysom Hill for sure to have his leg broken, and it's unfortunate for a guy that's definitely talented, to not be able to play against UCF, which it kind of downgrades the game in a way. We were hoping that these guys were going to be ranked in the top 20 at least and come in here.
But that's fine to me because the way we've played so far, we didn't need to worry about the possibility of the ranking of our opponent. It's kind of settled maybe some of the nerves of not just the players but the entire fan base of the quality of opponent coming in, and just focus on the game at hand and the win. And before this injury happened, Utah State was just punching them right in the mouth. They were playing a good game. They had a two-way playing linebacker who did pretty good running the ball, making some tackles, some blocks on a turnover. I was rather impressed with how physical Utah State was and how they were beating them in the vertical game. It was almost writing a blueprint of how UCF should play them.
Yeah, it's one of those things. It's a rival game. Not sure how much BYU kind of looks at it that way. Their long-term rival is obviously in Utah, but they haven't been playing. That series, I guess, came to a temporary end when Utah joined the Pac-12 a couple of years ago. And as far as Utah State, of course, those are the three teams kind of in that area of northern Utah, and Utah State's always been kind of like the little brother as far as that relationship goes. And, you know, they hadn't won a game in Provo. I forgot the year they said. It was maybe 1970 something. They had not won a game at BYU, so they obviously came out firing, and they were really fired up. You know, so yeah, I'm not totally shocked. I kind of was watching that game like, well, you know, there's a lot of top 25 games. Maybe BYU could be top 15. You know, I'd seen BYU play a couple games this season. Surely they won't stub their toe here against Utah State. But yeah, like I said, even if Taysom Hill had not have gotten hurt, Utah State was off to a pretty good start, and they may have still won that game.
Yeah, it's unfortunate, though, that I'm going to reiterate this again. I said this. It's unfortunate that this game won't mean nearly as much. I think it's going to mean a lot, though, because they're an independent team, so it's not a Power 5, you know, game for us. But I think that they could, you know, be seeing a completely different offense from what UCF has seen on tape of these guys, so it could be interesting anyway, you know?
Well, yeah, I think whatever offense they do, I think plays the UCF defense advantage. What Taysom Hill was able to do with his feet, I think, was going to give UCF nightmares. You know, they were concerned about Matty Mock, the Missouri quarterback, and what he could do with his speed and eluding the rush, and Taysom Hill is that much better than Matty Mock as far as scrambling and whatnot. So I think, obviously, like I said, I think BYU would have been favored in the game, and now it turns out UCF is the one who is favored.
You know, we actually got a little bit of a preview with Ward coming in, and, you know, how our defense can adjust to that type of quarterback. And the backup, you know, forgive me for not knowing his name, but it's also mobility on for him as well. And some of that's necessary mobility just because he doesn't know how to make his reads yet. But I don't think they're going to run, you know, such a complex offense, but they're still going to run an offense based off what their quarterback can do with his arm and via his legs. So UCF has a foundation from what they've seen against Houston, how they need to play BYU, and this is our highest profile home game of the season. So it doesn't lose any more importance to me. I know they're not ranked and all that, but this team still needs to learn how to focus and to execute, and therefore it makes it a better situation for UCF under those circumstances.
I would assume that their quarterback is Kristen Stewart.
Yes.
That's, number 7. He's from Orem, Utah, 6'2", 208-pound senior. And their quarterback behind him, actually, I was just looking here, Hayden Griffiths from Windermere, Florida. That could, you know, so he may even get to see some time. You never know. It would be big for him.
Yeah, I didn't even realize that. That's interesting. Really, I just read as we speak now, I just saw a new story kind of pop up about BYU and how they kind of move on from that game. It doesn't really address the injury situations. They did have a lot of ankles in that game. I'm just reading one of the media reports from today's, I guess, media availability with their head coach, Brock Mendenhall. So, yeah, it'll be interesting to see, you know, how healthy they are otherwise. Like I said before, they could be losing several other starters as well. But yeah, the interesting thing you mentioned, the kid was from Windermere. I believe that is where the only Mormon temple in Florida is over there in Windermere, and there's a very large Latter-day Saints population in Orlando. So it'll be kind of interesting to see what kind of fan base, you know, BYU brings in. Thursday night does not always, you know, it's not ideal, you know, as far as getting big crowds and everything else with people who might live out of town. But from what the buzz is, BYU should bring a pretty decent crowd to Bright House, and obviously anyone who's of the LDS faith probably, you know, might look at the opportunity to go see BYU play. So it'll be kind of interesting to see how much blue we see in the stands on Thursday.
There'll be a good amount. You know, the LDS Church is the largest landholder in Central Florida, larger than Disney. So they have quite the presence. And I was actually expecting that. I saw there was a decent amount of tickets still left, but I was figuring, you know, regardless, we were going to have pretty much a sellout, if not close to it.
Yeah, I don't know. I'm kind of curious. I know, you know, as anyone knows, you can go on that Ticketmaster.com and kind of look at the map of available seats. And there's a lot of available seats in a lot of areas that are hard to push seats. And there's upper north end zone, some of those east sideline that come with a premium price because they are tied to a donation. Those $62, $72 seats. So these are still available. So I know that's kind of one big discussion point on the message board the last couple of days is how will this attendance be? I know Rutgers, another similar game on a Thursday night, had a pretty strong attendance last year. I think for it to look full, it's going to need big student support. They're obviously going to have to fill their 12,000, but then bring a lot more to help fill up some of those other seats.
I would think this, being only the second home game on a Thursday night and all that, the students would want to be involved in it. I mean, it was going to be, I guess, maybe a blackout of some kind. I don't know. They were talking about that.
Illinois tried an orange out
against
Purdue. A terrible idea. You want a bunch of pumpkins running around in your
blackout. It's a fan viral thing in terms of making a blackout. The school, from what I understand, are no longer going to, at least this year, are not going to do color-themed promotions because you'll never get, or very likely will not get, George O'Leary to cooperate with the color-themed promotions.
Shocking.
They had the blackout, obviously, last year against USF. They marketed that the entire year. They had the black helmets, and then O'Leary has the team wear the gold jerseys with the black helmets. The black helmets were, we can talk about uniforms another day, but maybe the black helmets were kind of an odd look anyway with that gold mohawk on them. But then when you combine them with the gold jerseys, they looked awful. And, the whole blackout didn't really, I don't know if that put a dampener on it, but it wasn't full cooperation.
Yeah.
And so knowing that they're not going to market a game as a blackout because they're going to, do this and this, and then when they get onto the field, the team will wear gold. So that's kind of but fans are, as far as a student fan group, the Gauntlet, and everybody else, they're just trying to just do something to virally promote the game. So it's an unofficial blackout this Thursday.
Well, I'm wearing my black jersey, so I'm going to participate. I'm actually going to wear my black jersey. So
I don't have any other color.
Good.
I was going to ask you something, and I can't remember.
All right, how about what we would expect from BYU's defense in this matchup against UCF? What are they going to bring against UCF versus different looks, and how is our offense going to find success?
I can't say I've really looked too much at the BYU defense yet. I'll be curious to see what O'Leary has his first media availability tomorrow on Monday to kind of see how he sizes them up. But for UCF, I think it's more about UCF at this point. I'm not sure where they're going to throw at them, but as we saw against Houston, it was very inconsistent with not only protection in the run game, but just at home and not seeing the receivers he should be throwing to. So that's the biggest thing UCF needs to worry about. And like I said before, is it going to be some sort of a situation if there's a couple poor series there, do you put in another look at Nick Patty? Do you put him in for a series? The thing about Nick Patty, and it's been maybe a month or so since I heard this, but just from talking to, someone who, goes to practices and kind of sees what's going and kind of is familiar with the quarterback situation, they say no one is more knowledgeable as far as reading defenses as Nick Patty is.
So you said this is like a Brett Hodges situation?
Yeah, perhaps. And that was sort of, if anyone followed the initial decision when DeNovo was named the starter, Justin Holman was almost written off. He was almost written off as being third string. They didn't officially say it. But what O'Leary and Charlie Tapp said is that Patty and Holman were 2A and 2B. And Tapp said several times comparing Nick Patty to Brett Hodges, the guy that's, they feel like he has a very high upside, but it's going to take a little bit of time for him to get acclimated to this offense. And, that's kind of was the buzz about him. So as we've seen Holman struggle a little bit, who knows, maybe the Holman that played the second half against Penn State comes out against BYU. If that happens, Holman is not gonna see the bench at all. But if he struggles again, I was kind of wondering, Nick Patty, could get a shot out there.
I really do think, and I this is a personal preference for me, but I really think we are not helping him out with our play calling. We're not playing to his strengths. We're not running screens or slants. We're not getting the ball to our most talented offensive weapons. Our wide receivers are our deepest group on this team. Some of these guys are NFL players, and we're not getting the ball in quick situations where it gives the offensive line, enough time to be able to block, and Holman enough time to make one or two reads and then go with the ball.
And that's what O'Leary said. And it's funny because O'Leary says that every week. I think he said it a couple weeks back. He said it today when he had his television show recapping the Houston game. He said we need to get the ball in our best players, which is our wide receivers. So he agrees with you for what it's worth. Now, unlike you, he has the power to make it happen. So, I've always kind of scratched my head a little bit as well, and then wondering that, your offensive line isn't the offensive line of last year. You need to do more creative ways to kind of get the ball in their hands and kind of let them make plays. So, yeah, I'm kind of interested if we'll see anything, maybe new against BYU, or it'll just be kind of like the same old stuff we saw against Houston.
And that's the one thing for BYU. John O'Corn's only good game this season has come against BYU. Utah State did it, pretty good early on in the passing game against BYU. I've watched a couple of their games. They have a pretty good front seven. They get decent pressure. They really are stout against the run. But when it comes to their safeties and their corners, they're smaller a little bit, and they don't react to the balls really quick, and they don't have that top end speed. If there's a matchup that we really need to exploit, or a game that we could really expand. I don't want to expand our offense so much, but just get the ball out. That's where we can really gain a significant edge against BYU defensively, from what I've noticed. And I'm clearly not a coach or anything like that. But this is the time that we need better play calling and a little bit more consistency from our quarterback play, but we can aid him in that endeavor.
Yeah. I anxiously look forward to seeing if that happens on Thursday.
All right, so I think we're coming to about the end of this thing.
Whoa, what about our guys in the NFL? We had a solid day today.
Well, we were getting there too.
All right.
So go ahead, Troy, with what you saw in the NFL.
Man, Kamal Ishmael. I love that kid. Though Atlanta blew it at the end, and once again, Eli Manning suddenly looks like a competent quarterback. Ishmael, had 14 tackles, 9 solo, helped lead his team today. That was great to see. The UFC North, Blake had a little bit of a rough day because, Jacksonville sucks.
Blake threw 2 interceptions, but I think had 191 yards besides that. Did not score didn't throw a touchdown anyway. I don't think they scored any touchdowns.
Had a bunch of field goals.
But also, it was the debut of Storm Johnson, and he was the number 1 rusher for the Jacksonville Jaguars today.
And that should say something because he had 4 carries for 27 yards. You know who the number 2 rusher for Jacksonville was?
Blake Bortles.
With 4 carries and 19 yards.
Yeah, so, whatever. It's not, what we would hope for those 2 guys. Brandon, are you following those guys as well?
Yeah, I watched most of the Jaguars game. I listened to the first half on the radio. I saw the second half on TV. But yeah, unfortunately, that pick 6, you're kind of rooting like this is an opportunity. You get the ball back after a turnover, you can drive down the field and potentially try to take a lead. But that was a killer right there. And he'll learn from those. He's had a couple of those, I think, so far this season. But it does seem like it'll take some time for him to kind of, learn that, you don't make that throw. And obviously for Jacksonville to get some better players around him.
Well, they have a lot of young players, so even their talented guys, a wide receiver like Robinson and such, they still don't know the nuances of their positions. And then the offensive line is terrible. But I like the fact that we got to see Storm. It's because, it's almost as they're starting to realize Toby Gerhardt's not the answer. And Denard Robinson has looked good in spots. But maybe let's give, Storm's a big guy.
You could have a heck of a 1-2 punch with Robinson and Johnson, though. A little guy and a bigger guy.
Yeah, it's true. They're incredibly athletic guys, very much unlike Gerhardt.
Right. I'm not a big Gerhardt fan, so in no way am I.
Anyone not related to Toby Gerhardt or big Stanford people, they're probably not Gerhardt fans.
All right. So, anything else in the NFL? I didn't.
Bruce caught a couple balls, and AJ Bouye didn't play. Josh Robinson didn't play.
Some injuries, right, for them.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
But I was very proud of Kamal Ishmael. The kid has worked so hard from the time he hit UCF to now in the pros, and it's uplifting.
It is. It's awesome. On my face. It's awesome. It's great to see those guys doing that. All right. So at this point, I think we're going to do our picks for this week.
All right, we'll start with you, Brandon.
Brandon, what's your pick for the score for our game against BYU this week?
Okay, let's see here. I'm going to go with I'll go with 27 for UCF and 20 for BYU. So I'll predict a 27-20 UCF win.
Okay, I'm going to say 14-6.
Who?
Okay.
UCF. 14-6.
That's a fantastic score. Is it baseball?
No, I think that we're gonna hold them. I don't think they're gonna do much on offense.
So we win an ugly game.
We win an ugly game.
Some Cougars are ugly. It just happens.
We're going to score 14 points. They're going to score 2 field goals, which makes 6.
Thank you, math man.
Well, whatever.
All right. Watching the fourth quarter of the Houston game, all I can think about was how bad we were going to lose to BYU. It was so frustrating. It was infuriating. My girlfriend was like, I'm going to take the dogs. I'm going outside, and hopefully this game will be over by the time I come back. Then watching Utah State do things that UCF is capable of doing, and then Taysom Hill gets injured. This just breeds a little bit of life in me. I was totally going to, pull a Mizzou here and go for the other team just because I thought they're a better team. Now, I think we're going to take this one 30-10.
30-10. All right.
It's going to be a big one. I think we're going to click with our athletes, and our defense is found its rhythm. And I say that for our defense because our defensive line is starting to get penetration. And though BYU has an experienced offensive line, though they have injuries, it's a short week. Like Brandon touched on an injury for one of their offensive linemen. And our defensive line, they're starting to get that edge, starting to get that swagger. Terrence Plummer talked about in an interview he did with Brandon on UCFsports.com about, the swagger coming back for the guys and, getting competitive and fun again and doing a little dance afterwards after you celebrate. And the guys are into it, and
it's good to see.
And when you're starting to collapse the pocket, when you're starting to make, penetrate and close some of those gaps up, it's going to give us advantageous field position, and therefore we're going to be able to run the score up a little bit.
All right. Well, I think that about does it. This is Andrew Phegley with
Troy Ondrizek
and Brandon Helwig joining us.
Thank you, Brandon.
Thank you very much,
Thank
Brandon.
you, guys.
Again. All right, this has been episode number 11.
Hey, Once!
We will see you next week.
UCF charge onto the field. With our spirits we'll never yield. Black and gold charge right through the line.